Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Laura Dave. Laura is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Last Thing He Told Me, 800 Grapes, and other novels. Her work has been published in 38 countries, and The Last Thing He Told Me is a #1 series on Apple TV, which of course everyone has seen, I'm sure, with Jennifer Garner. And Laura lives in Santa Monica. Thank you for joining us, Laura.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
So you had the most superstar experience with your last book. It wasn't your first book, which is such an interesting thing, right? Because we think about sometimes debut novels have these ridiculous lives,
Yeah.
but we're going to focus on this new book, which is fabulous,
Thank
and a beautiful cover, and I love how they've sort of given it the same feel as
Yeah.
The Last Thing He Told Me. It's called The Night We Lost Him. But first, I have to ask, I just want to hear, in your words, what it was like, how this experience has been for you since the launch of The Last Thing He Told Me.
It's so interesting. And you just raised such a great point, which is I think sometimes, or I can imagine that if a book receives that, has that reception with if it's someone's first novel, it might be disorienting or I can't imagine that. I sort of,
Right.
by the time The Last Thing He Told Me hit, that was my 6th book. And
Yeah.
so I was very used to books coming out. Some of them made noise, some of them didn't. And I really had sort of a firm grasp on my writing process and on publishing in general, and on understanding, our main responsibility as writers, which I know you understand too, besides having beautiful bookshelves like you have, is to get up every day and do the work.
Yeah.
So when The Last Thing He Told Me happened, it was really sort of exciting, and there were a lot of pinch me moments. And also, it didn't sort of affect my day to day. I still got up the same time, went to work in the same way.
Yep.
I've been asked a bunch, was it hard to write the book after that book? And it wasn't. And I think it's because it was book 6. I imagine
Yeah.
if it was book 1, that might have been a different rodeo.
Yeah, like the sophomore slump, but
Yes.
you've done this enough times. But I can imagine there is, it's I think keeping your brain in that way, keeping
Yeah.
your schedule, keeping your like this is how I wrote that book, this is how I'm gonna write the next book and the
Yeah.
next book and the next book. Really, I mean, that had to have worked in your favor because as you said, there must have been moments where you're like, is this really my life?
Well, it was sort of this bizarre thing, and it happened in the middle of COVID.
Ah,
So I wasn't sort of out in the world on any sort of book tour. I was at home when the book came out, and my husband and I were writing the series together. When the book came into the world, we were already sort of deep into The Last Thing He Told Me, Second Life, and no childcare and all the rest of it, and so
right.
there was some mini very quiet celebrations at home, and then also absolute and utter chaos. So
Yes.
yeah, so I'm excited because now that this is out in the world, it's the first time I'm in the middle of a book tour now and doing all those things, and so it's a different experience.
Yeah, and that was a really hard time for writers, I think. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a hard time for the whole world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not, but I think it's interesting because I think of our job as being so isolating anyway, right? I mean, we are, you're alone with your computer and your thoughts and, that blank page, which is, as we know, such a terrifying and exciting opportunity.
Yes. Yes.
And yet there was a weird thing that happened to a lot of authors I know during that period where we felt like weirdly so much more isolated that we didn't recognize that we must have real connections as well as being alone to be a writer, right? You can't just be alone.
Yes, yes.
No,
I
yeah,
think that's definitely true. Though I do remember shortly after COVID happened, when I said to my husband, I said something like, "Oh my God, this is insane." He's like, "You were living in COVID. Like, this is what you
yes,
did." like never left the house anyway. You know, I'm such a homebody, but I absolutely agree with you. It feels different. It feels different to not, you know, be able to walk into your local bookstore, walk into your local library, all the communities that we as writers create with other book lovers. It's not, it wasn't the same thing. So, you
And
know,
just not to, I'm exactly the same. I'm such a homebody. I have a little coaster that says, I still want to be invited, but I'm not coming.
yes,
And I
yes,
think that's totally my MO. But when you don't have the choice, it's
yes,
like,
it's different.
this is totally
Yeah.
different. So, okay, well, let's talk about your new book, which is fabulous. The Night We Lost Him. Now, tell us a little bit about this book.
Okay, so The Night We Lost Him begins with a family patriarch who is a hotel magnate at his sort of escapist, um, I'd say, beach house, though it's really also his main residence in Carpinteria, California, which is near Santa Barbara, California. It's a place people might know. More of a landmark. And the book opens with him at this home, standing on the edge of his cliff, the way he did most nights, and he's pushed to his death. And we open our novel about a month later, when his two of his children from different marriages who are estranged from each other, they sort of join forces when one of them is trying to figure out what really happened to their father. I apologize. I don't know if you can hear that ringing. I hope it stops in a minute.
No, I don't hear
Okay, good.
it.
Trying to figure out what actually happened to their father. And in the process of this, they uncover a 50-year-old family secret that sort of teaches them not just who killed their father, but who their father actually was.
Right. I mean, there's something, and so lovely, of course, that the initial conflict. So there's a boy, Sam, and he has a
Yes.
twin brother, Tommy, and they're also, estranged,
Yes.
right? And then basically, we have. Oh my God, I just am
Nora?
forget Nora. I was like, what? No, what? Oh my God, my little
We're very in
yes.
sync.
My brain. And then you have Nora, and these are they're successful professionals. Sam
Yes.
works for the business. Nora has been very adamant that she's very independent, but she's an architecture. That's another thing you do so well. And here I'm going to ramble for a minute again. Is that the details, the way that Nora looks at the world, because
Mm,
we're in her point of view. We're like most of the book, or
right.
at least more than half, right? And she looks at the world like an architect, and the way you see her, because I think that's hard to do, right? I'm assuming you're not an architect.
No.
um but the fact that to make a character feel so genuine, you really do look at they people look at the world very differently, and it's constructed by your perspective and your career and your loves and your passions. And you do this in the last thing he told me as well, which I think is, but there's those moments when she describes architecture, or she describes a space, or there's a beautiful line about how when the light first hits the wall. Do you know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
what I always tab my favorite lines and things, and I'm wondering if I could even find it. But it's just like it's such a. So anyway, that's my babble on that. I think you did such a beautiful job with Nora. She feels so genuine, and I think what we feel from both these children, and Tommy when we meet him as well, is that what it is to be part of a family that is, broke, is sort of divided by,
Yep.
half siblings, um and the struggles, and sort of like where do we find, where do we meet in the middle, because
Yes.
we're not true siblings, although even true, even full
Yes.
siblings obviously have that. So tell us how the story came. Like, how do you, what was the seed for the story?
Well, first of all, I very much appreciate everything you just said, because for me, I start in a very deep way. Oh, well, I should say that as sort of from 20,000 feet, I always start a novel in the same way, which is there's an emotional question I want to sort of dig into. And here the question was, what does it mean to be the witness to someone's life? And knowing that that was my question, it always starts for me with the main character. And I love I love creating a woman at the center of my books, particularly with The Night We Lost Him, who we get to watch become the hero of her own life. And in order to do that, I try to create a specificity to how exactly what you said, how that person sees the world. Because to me, if they see it in a specific way, then they're going to be the ones that are able to solve the mystery because it's going to be that skill set. So when I started researching architecture, I came across neuroarchitecture, which instead of, the idea behind architecture, if you know not a lot about it, which I didn't know a lot about it before I started the research here, you think of the sort of the grandest sculptural buildings, but neuroarchitecture is all about building and design with the idea of impacting in a positive way people's emotional and physical well-being. That you can create a room that holds you in a certain way. You can create a place um, where you heal yourself quite, and
Yeah.
it's this whole school of architecture which I found absolutely fascinating. And I ended up talking with some people who focus on neuroarchitecture, some really talented, wonderful architects who I acknowledged at the end of the book for all the ways they were patient and answered a million questions. And but what I really learned at the base of it, and which helped me understand Nora and therefore the story, was the patience that's involved, the precision, the empathy, all these characteristics that are exactly why when everyone was telling her, no, 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 your father just fell, she was like, no, he didn't just fall. And also, I need to understand what was happening with him that I missed in order to
Yeah.
understand who hurt him. And
Yeah.
so she's able to look at it that way. So that is what I knew going in, but I
Hmm.
did not know anything else. I don't outline. I don't know if you outline.
I wish I did. I don't.
Yes.
It would be
So
so lovely.
it would be so lovely. So for you too, I imagine then that writing is rewriting. So when I
Mhm.
sit down, I start with that initial question. All I knew going in was that her brother, her estranged brother, showed up at her house and at a job site at his house actually, and that this initial conversation led them to investigate the death together.
Yeah.
And that over the course of this investigation, I was hoping to answer the question what it means to be the witness to someone's life. So that's where this all grew from for me.
And what I love about it is not just, I mean, Nora is the primary witness, but they're
Yes.
all witnesses to each
Yes.
other's lives, right?
Yes.
Like, so, the Liam, who is the father who's deceased,
Mm.
he has a brother, Joe, another sort of like, it's not his brother actually, but
Mm.
they have a brother like relationship. And
They're
it's
like,
all of those, yeah, it's all those sort of, and the ways in which we see something that we think is
yes,
something that ends up being like only after sort of really excavating it, which is what Nora does. Does she
yes,
realize, and it's understanding his, things he didn't tell them. Because of course, in this kind of patriarch, right, he's a very strong man. There's a lot he kept to himself. And so
yes,
people had different parts of the puzzle, but nobody had all of it, or at least nobody
exactly.
that, not Nora, right? Not Nora,
Yes,
not Sam.
yes,
And I think that is so powerful because that's our relationships with everybody. We are all witnessing each other's lives. And I love also that you put a woman at the center because I mean, Nora has there's so many, she's right at that part of life where she's like, maybe going to get married and maybe going to have a baby. And there's all these, and you feel like, I'm like now on the other side of that, like grown children. It's like, God, do you remember the pressure of that? Like, are we going to do this thing? And I mean, it's
yeah,
just really, it's a very intense portion of life. And she's just lost both of her parents
yes,
really in quick succession.
yes,
So it's kind of a beautiful point to put her, right? It's a impossible moment
yes.
in some
I
ways.
think absolutely. And I think there's like a lot of ways to sort of approach mystery writing or suspense writing. And for me, when I'm not um the fulcrum on which I try to write, because I know my own limits. I
Yeah.
am not, I wouldn't be good at writing violence, necessarily. Like, I'm just not, I get too scared. Even when people get scared when they are reading, I'm sorry, when they're watching a movie with violence. Like, I was on the plane the other day and I was watching Jaws and I shrieked. Like, at the
Oh,
middle of the plane, everyone's like looking at me. I'm like, that was not the best. But even with reading, I get scared. So, but the fulcrum on which I try to move everything is usually around, and I don't even think I realized this until after this book, is really around grief and love. And
Yeah.
if often the answer to the mystery, you'll find it on the other side of excavating grief. And so
Yeah.
that is certainly what's going on here. Um,
Yeah.
so it's sort of a different kind of mystery in that way.
Yeah.
But I really do think that there's a piece always that, and with architecture as well, it becomes sort of a mirror of this idea. And I actually have a quote in the book from this wonderful architect it says that the building that you imagine and the building after it's created, the life it has, are two different things
Yeah.
entirely. And in
Yeah.
some ways, that's true of anyone we try to love. The person
Right.
we think we see versus who they actually were are often two different people. And I really wanted
Right.
to play with that idea.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a shocking thing. I think particularly when we discover our parents after they're gone. It's a
Yes.
shocking thing. I mean, first of all, it's parents is such a weird thing, right? You know your parents in one context.
Yes.
And it's like, and then you know nothing about them when they were, growing up. Only, I mean,
Yep.
you maybe have heard stories, but like to then excavate, which they do, in at Windbreak, which is the um house on the cliff that is Liam's sort of love house.
Yes.
They get to learn parts of him that they never would have known. I think it's a weird thing to sort of take a little bit of it for granted. Like, of course they were children, and of course they grew up, but like to see evidence of that period, oftentimes comes as a bit of a shock. As it
Yes.
does for Nora. It's just like she's
Yes.
like, wow, this is something I didn't ever really consider about her dad, right? That at some point he was youthful and, you know,
I totally agree with that. And I actually think about it in this way, which is, how when you're young and you sort of are in a house or in a room or wherever, and you think it seems so big, everything
yeah,
seems so big. And then often if you go back to that same place as an adult, you have a totally different perspective on it. You're like, this wasn't so big. And
mm-mm,
this gymnasium that I thought my elementary school gymnasium, which I thought was so big, is actually kind of small. And how is that possible? And in a similar way, when you look at your parents, when you look at people with that no longer you're seeing with that childlike glaze, when
right.
that's lifted and you look at them a different way, it's incredibly disconcerting as much as it is powerful. Um,
Yes.
because to really see it, you have to accept what you didn't see before.
Right, right. And we consider our parents as foundation, or they're this,
Yes.
and yet at some point they were also soft ground, right? So
Yes.
we feel like it's firm ground that we're standing on, of course, because they're our parents. And then all of a sudden
Yes.
you realize, and it happens, I don't know, like if parents get divorced, or if, you see them, something breaks them. It's just like, whoa, that wasn't expected. I want to go back for a second
Absolutely.
to the grief and love thing, because I think another part of what you explore in both the books I've read, is the idea is what love costs us, right?
Yes.
What is the cost of love? And I think in both of these books, there's such a theme there with all the characters, right? We see it with Sam, and
Yes.
he's maybe getting married. Get also like, and with the relationship between Tommy and his wife,
Yes.
and between the siblings and the parents, and their, and Liam has been married 3 times, and each of those had a different sort of, you know, cost to both parties, right?
Yes, yes. I think that's something I'm really interested in.
Yeah,
And I think the way I sort of named the question in the last thing he told me was, what are we willing to do for the people we love? And
yeah,
I think that permeates this book as well,
yeah,
I think it's such an important question because it doesn't just reveal, how we feel about the people we love, but how we feel about the nature of love itself. How important is it to us? Um,
right.
Sort of live in that relational way. And that is the central question here when you think about what it means to be the witness to someone's life. What that really means to me is, what does it mean to really show up for somebody? What is
Yeah,
required of you in that effort? And I think I'm thinking about this also. We were chatting before we started chatting
yeah,
about I'm working on the sequel to The Last Thing He Told Me. And I think, again, like, I think that's sort of there's an endless well of how we answer that question. And you were noting that Nora's at a certain stage of her life, and then we move and we're at other stages in our lives. And the question becomes different as you get to
Yeah.
different phases of your life. What you have to do looks different, and how you go about doing it looks different. You
Yeah.
know, the very nature of being a mom to young kids, that means holding on pretty tightly. And being a mom to older kids, sometimes that means letting go. Those are the same loves, it's
Yes.
expressing itself in a different way. And I really wanted to have a look at that.
Yeah.
Especially, something else I was doing research on was really to understand this family patriarch, who was a very different father to his different children,
Yeah.
despite loving them equally, and also was a very different husband and a very different partner to these people that came in and out of his life. And part of that had to do less with the different people and more with himself, and how he was able to show up for himself during those periods of his life as well. So that's definitely something that I'm always sort of thinking about in terms of these characters.
I mean, and it's super powerful. And I think, the way, like, we talk about the cost in like the way what Joe holds back from these kids who are grieving their dad, because he feels like he's being loyal to, his brother,
Yes.
Liam. And also because what good, he's in his mind, he's like, what good does it really do us to know some things later? And yet
Yeah.
for the children of that person, they want, and I do think that they learn things, that we do learn things that sometimes are disappointing, right? And we have to we have to somehow marry the what we thought that person, we thought that person was, with who they really were. And that's incredibly powerful too. I love also the fact that Liam kept his children really separate,
Yes.
and that made them, that was, they sort of thought, I think probably each of them thought, well, what's wrong with me? And it wasn't really about them, right? It was, like you said, it was about him.
Well, it's funny
And
'cause yeah, I really, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, you didn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no, I was something else that I did when I was looking at the research, because I really wanted to understand Liam, was I looked and I interviewed some men who are sort of were the heads of major corporations in some way. And I also read several books. I read a book about Sumner Redstone and the Sackler family, and all these families. And it's a very common theme. Once a man with that amount of power lets you in, he doesn't kind of ever let you go. Like, all these men sort of had relationships with all their wives, or it was quite complicated with the different families and the compartmentalizing. And I thought that that's such an interesting thread to see through all of these people about what it means to be in someone's inner circle in
Yeah.
that way. And
Yeah.
there's a real world event. Just Enron was sort of an inspiration for me with The Last Thing He Told Me. And here, and I don't want it to be a spoiler because it has everything to do with the twist, but there was, I'll just say, a children's book publisher that the succession battle that happened around that publisher's
Hmm.
was really inspired a large piece of the
Hmm.
story.
Yeah. Well, I think the delivery of the twist, and and twists, but I know which one you're referring to, of course. Is beautifully done, because one thing I think about that we see in books now is everybody's so focused on creating a twist, right?
Mm,
That some of the twists feel like it's a little jarring,
yeah.
or it feels unfair, like the character
Yes.
had information that they didn't share. And
Yes.
I have
Yes.
I struggle with that. I'm like, wait a minute, that's sort of feels like cheating if you're in their point of view. But and this all just, like, the way it unfurls, and we are unraveling it with Nora as she's unraveling it at the end, as she's putting those pieces together. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what's happening here. And
Yeah.
it makes so much sense, and you don't feel like you have to go back and be like, wait, what did I miss?
Yeah.
It's beautifully done. So and that's a
Thank
testament, so that's a testament, I think, to the idea that you don't outline, right? So
you. Yes.
how does it work? You put a draft, if you're like me, you put a draft down, and it's
Yeah.
kind
It's a
of,
mess. Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know if yours is a mess. Mine's a mess.
Mine's
But
a mess.
I think too, what you just said, I think is really important because I think there's a lot of different ways to write. But for me particularly, I don't like when a narrator is holding something back, because then I feel like the goal I always feel like is, how do you create a twist that's both inevitable and surprising at the same
Yes.
time? Those things. So, so to do that, I try to reveal to the reader while I'm discovering it myself. And
Yeah.
while, my proxy is discovering it herself, so
Yep.
that you have that sense of surprise and inevitability, hopefully, running through it. Because if she knows something 80 pages before she tells, I feel like you're going to feel the hand of a writer in a way that I'm not interested in.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think you even with in the ways in which other characters are holding things back from people,
Yeah.
those Nora and Sam are on it. They're like, he's
Yeah.
hiding something, she's
Yeah.
hiding something, and of course that all makes sense in the end as to not only what they're hiding but why they were hiding it. And I think that's also really powerful because you want your characters to be at least as smart as I want the characters to be at least as smart as I am.
I
So
totally agree with that.
if I can
Yes.
figure something out, then the character better be figuring it out.
I couldn't agree more. I totally agree with that. Yep, yep. Because otherwise, it just doesn't feel good. The
Mm-mm.
storytelling doesn't feel good. I really love books that I feel like I can read them out loud, like someone else's books, not mine. Like, like that feeling of, like, when people talk about not being able to put something down, to me, it's that feeling of I love the feeling like it's almost like you're sitting around the fire and someone's reading it to you. And the
Yeah.
very nature of that is you're experiencing the surprise, you're experiencing all of that in real time. And if you don't
Yeah,
have a smart narrator, you're not trusting them to tell you a story. So
exactly.
I think that's really important.
I do too. And I think it's hard to accomplish. I think for a character to be both, really smart and also really genuine.
Yes.
Um, and I think maybe this is one reason I don't outline is that I feel like if I knew what she knew already, then I would want to forecast it 30 pages before even she would, you know what I mean? Like I'd struggle to
Totally
keep it
agree.
back.
Yep.
Um, versus if I'm getting there, like at the same time the character's getting there, it has a freshness that I don't. And I say this also because I can't outline, so it's very
Yes.
convenient that I don't want to be able to. But
Yes. I'm the
I
same.
just feel like that's part of it. So do you feel like when you finish a draft, is the draft your sort of it's the exploration of what the story, and by the time you finish it, you kind of know what the story is?
Yes, I feel like the first, Stephen King has this wonderful book I always recommend it to people who want to write, called On Writing.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that book.
and he talks about the first draft is for you, the next drafts are for other people. And I always
Yeah,
think about that. Sometimes the first draft is really a skeletal version of you telling yourself a story. Sometimes, the first draft of the last thing he told me, of those 90,000 words, I probably threw out 70,000.
yeah.
And
Isn't that interesting? Yeah,
I think sometimes, what makes you a writer is as much what you throw away as what you're willing to keep, and what you're willing to throw away as what you keep. I should say that the other way.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and and that's all part of it. It's all prologue to getting to the story that you're supposed to tell. So with that first draft, I always recommend to young writers starting out, don't be precious with it. You'll figure out the story, you'll fix it later. It's just about getting from A to Z in that
yeah.
first draft so that you know where you need to go.
Yeah. And do you find like so I know I've talked to some authors like Gillian McAllister is one of them,
Yes.
who literally writes a whole book and then she files it away and starts with a blank page now that she knows what the story is. Now, I have never been able to do that. That sounds
Wow.
horrible, right?
That's
Just
cool.
like, yeah. I mean, just like, right, because now she feels like she'll tell it better the second time, which
Yeah.
of course she works insane hours to accomplish that, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's sort of nutty, but it is interesting, right? Like I feel like because sometimes it's harder to pull the pieces that belong away from all the other stuff,
Yes.
than it is maybe. I mean, I've never done this, and believe me, Laura, I'm not thinking about doing it. But that you can imagine it would be maybe easier to just be like, okay, as you're rewriting, being like, now I remember that part still resonates with me, so then it belongs in. So how do you cull, through
So
the mess?
I do sort of the opposite of what she does, which is that every time I start a new draft, I take the draft before and I literally open a new draft document that says draft two, and then
Uh-huh.
start working off of that becomes a new blueprint. if draft one, there's no blueprint and it's an empty page with just my initial question, with just that first scene, then I have the new draft. But I have no problem throwing away whole, let alone chapters, whole characters sometimes
Yeah,
don't survive.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then,
I think,
and then,
yeah.
yes, so that's my answer. How about you?
No, I think it's really, I actually like that idea though. Um, I tend to sort of keep work with the same file, but I'm not sure that, and give it a different name. But I think actually there's something really, if you're working on them side by side, you're looking at that, like the scene, and saying, this is the piece, for instance, of this that works, that I'm gonna, sorry, my dog's, I think my child is down here. Anyway, I'm like, somebody is in my panic room. Anyway, so it's, you take the pieces that work and pull
Mhm.
them into the new document. Is that what you're saying, kind of, and
Well,
leave the rest?
I actually don't even end up looking usually. Like, so once I like, it's the new document, I always have just the new date. So
Yeah,
so then that old document, that's just sort of also me saving it, because with my first book, I spilled water on my computer and I lost the whole thing. So now I'm just like being very, very careful. But,
yes,
and what I do is then knowing I have the old draft, it puts me in a situation where I feel much less precious about throwing anything away or starting again, because I know I have that draft to go back to if I've missed
right.
something or left me, but I almost never go back to it.
So it's similar, right? I mean,
Yes.
you're just exactly like you said. It's like Gillian McAllister's way Inside Out. Well, I
Yes.
mean, and it works. And I think, and then at what point do you let somebody else get involved? Because I think that's another really interesting question for
Yeah.
aspiring authors or young authors.
It's so long. I wait so long. Maybe 18 drafts. Like literally,
Interesting.
I usually don't show anyone until it's done, meaning like I feel like I've taken it as far as I can take it. And then I will share it with my husband and my agent and my editor and get a round of notes from them. Actually, sometimes before I even show my editor, I have some like really close friends who are great readers, who I'll give it to them first.
Yeah.
Um, so that it's a long time, because
Yeah.
what I worry about is I if I give it too early to people, it lessens my desire to find the exact ending that I need to find.
Mm. Right. It feels like, I think sometimes, I feel the same way. I'm 100 pages into a new book, and I'm like, there's just some part of me that really wants someone to read it and say, "You're just doing great. Just keep going."
Yes.
But it's like you have to kind of find that for yourself, because whatever suggestions they make, right, it
Yeah.
might take you in the wrong direction. Okay, so
Exactly.
tell us a little bit. You're working right now on the sequel. I mean, do people know this is coming? They must be so excited.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not very good at social media. I mentioned on social media a few months ago, but it's coming next fall. So I'm writing the sequel to The Last Thing He Told Me. So, actually, as soon as we're off this call, I'm actually heading to do some research. But I I think I always imagined that to be one book. And I never thought I didn't write that with the intention of writing a second book. I thought it was a complete story onto itself. And then shortly after the book came out, I kept getting the same sort of question of, do you know what happens to Owen? And do you know what happened? What happened over these
Right.
years? What happens next? And much to my surprise, I had a very complete answer in my head. And that didn't mean necessarily that I thought it was going to be a sequel. But I sat down and started writing, really only for myself at that moment to see. And I wrote 100 pages, and I thought, oh my gosh, I know exactly what I want to do here. And so now it's this sort of lovely exploration of that,
Mhm.
of finishing that story, of answering some of the questions that were in that first book. So
Yeah, that is so fun. Well, I mean, what an exciting, and you're going, if I'm not wrong, you're going to France to
yes,
do a
yes,
little research. So it
I'm
sounds
going to
like,
France.
I think we should all be setting books in France. That
I
seems to me
know.
like we should have to go to France for research. That's very smart. You were
Yes,
thinking on that one.
I was. I mean, I am bringing in tow my husband and my 8-year-old, so we'll see how easy this research goes. But I'm very much looking forward to it. Except that the thing is, and it sounds like you do what I do in terms of like, the no outlining and the research heavy and the everything. Like the anxiety I felt about squeezing in this trip to France, because I'm like, when am I going to go? And they
Right.
in a part of France that sort of closes down for the year in November, and I'm like, I got to get there now. So it's a very, very quick trip to France, but I'm still extremely excited to go.
I'm so excited for you. Well, Laura, it was so fun to chat. I absolutely loved. I loved the last thing you told me. I loved the night we lost him. I'm super excited about what's coming next year. So congratulations on all your success and keep in doing the hard work. Because I think there's got to be a part of you that could be like, I could probably just be done with this, but how do we ever quit writing, right?
Oh, I know. We can't. We can't.
Mm-mm.
We need a room like your beautiful room. And honestly, I have to say, I'm obsessed with your room. So it's going to be so weird when I'm done with this tour that I like show up in Montana, but I'm coming. But
Anytime you can
uh
come, right, set up a desk and look out in the backyard with
it's
me. It's
it's
it is pretty spectacular. I'm
it's
pretty happy
pretty
with it.
it's pretty spectacular. Those bookshelves they've made my whole day. So thank you so
Oh,
much for having
thank
me.
you. This was so fun. Everybody, Laura, tell us where to find you. You're not good at social media, but we want to find you there anyway. Where are you so we can follow you?
I'm on at Laura Dave Author at on Instagram.
Okay.
That's it. That's where I
That's
am.
it. That's the
Yes.
best place. And
Yes.
anybody your local bookstore is going to have this book. So, and I assume is there information? You're doing a tour, I'm
Yes.
sure.
And that's on Laura Dave Author on Instagram and also on my website, lauradave.com.
Okay, perfect. Everybody go look for this. You're going to love this book. And once you've read it, I want to talk about all the interesting stuff at the end because I don't get to talk about that on the show. So thank you for joining us with Laura Dave on Killer Women, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.